Larkspur Junction, Kansas, 1885. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway had been running through Larkspur Junction for 4 years, and in that time, the platform had developed the particular character of a place that was used hard and maintained just enough. The cedar siding had gone gray from weather. The iron rails held the day's heat long after the sun dropped. When the locomotive came in, a Baldwin 440 burning Kansas coal, black smoke rolling back over the cars, it filled the platform with the smell of hot metal and creosote from the treated oak ties, a smell that settled into clothing and did not leave. Wilson Kincaid did not seem to mind the smell. Every Friday, a few minutes before 4 o'clock, he tied his horse at the post outside the station and bought a platform ticket, 5 cents, standard Atchison fare for non-passengers, a practice the railroad enforced to keep the loading areas clear of idlers and would-be cargo thieves. He always had the exact change ready. He wore his best shirt. He sometimes brought wildflowers, not always, not on a schedule, just on the Fridays when they were growing along the south fence on his way to town, and it seemed right. He sat on the second bench from the east end of the platform. The eastbound arrived at 4:12. He watched every passenger step down. Women in traveling clothes, men with cases, families navigating trunks and children. He watched each of them with the patient attention of someone who knows what face he is looking for. When the last car pulled away, he sat a few minutes more. He looked at the tracks going east until they bent around the hill and disappeared. Then he put his hat on and rode home. Nobody in Larkspur Junction asked him about it. This was not because nobody had noticed. A man who buys a platform ticket every Friday for 3 years without boarding a train is noticed. But Wilson Kincaid had ranched in this county for 15 years. His operation sat 12 miles south, 300 head, decent land, and people knew him. They knew, in the way small communities know things without saying them, that the bench and the ticket and the flowers were not their business to question. The new clerk had been at the Larkspur Junction ticket window for 6 weeks when she started paying attention to him. Her name was Mara Ellison. She had come from Wichita after burying both parents in the same winter, her father in January, her mother in March. 2 losses so close, the grief had blurred into something she was still working out how to carry. She had taken the position because it was available, and because being somewhere nobody knew her seemed, at the time, easier than staying somewhere they did. She sold tickets, logged arrivals, kept the schedule board current. She watched people come and go. The man on the second bench she noticed on her first Friday. By the 4th, she knew his name from the ledger and had started watching for him without deciding to. He arrived at 3:52. He bought his platform ticket with exact change. He thanked her without quite looking at her, the way people thank clerks, automatically, without real attention. He sat on the bench. He watched the eastbound arrive and empty. He watched the tracks after it left. He rode home. Then the 5th Friday brought rain. Wilson arrived at 3:52 in his best shirt, which was getting wet, carrying no flowers because the rain had started before he reached the fence line. He sat on the bench in the rain. He watched the eastbound arrive and empty in the rain. He sat for his few minutes after and looked at the wet tracks. Mara watched all of this from the window. She made a decision. She closed the window. She walked out to the platform. She sat down beside him. "Who are you waiting for?" He did not answer immediately. She had been watching him for 6 weeks and understood, without being told, that Wilson Kincaid was a man who considered what he said before saying it, not because he was slow, but because he understood that words were not neutral. He reached into his coat. He took out a platform ticket, not the one he had bought today, an old one, the paper soft at the creases from years of folding and unfolding. The kind of ticket you kept as a talisman, not as evidence. He held it, but did not hand it to her. "My wife," he said. Mara waited. Her name was Evelyn. When we first married, she went to care for her mother in Salina. Her mother was sick, 14 months. Every Friday, she took the eastbound home to me for the weekend. He looked at the ticket. I came here to meet her. This bench. The train was always late, and she said she could see me from the window before it stopped. She always knew which bench because it was always the same one. When her mother died, Mara said, she came home for good. But we kept coming, Friday afternoons, sitting here watching trains. She said it was the place she first understood someone was waiting for her. He folded the ticket, put it back. She died 3 years ago. Fever. 12 days. He looked at the tracks. I kept coming. Mara sat in the rain beside him and looked at the wet platform boards. A Baldwin locomotive had left its creosote smell on everything. The station's cedar siding was dark with water. She thought about what it meant to have had someone waiting on a specific bench at a specific time, week after week for years, and what it cost to keep coming to that bench alone. You know she won't be on the train, she said. I know, he said. Then why? He was quiet for a long moment. Because this is the last place I can remember her running, he said. She always ran the last part of the platform. Said walking was too slow when you'd been on a train for 3 hours. A pause. I can still see it here. I can't always see it at the ranch anymore. Mara looked at the platform. She imagined it. A woman running the last 20 yards toward a man on the second bench, and a man who had been coming back to stand in the space of that running for 3 years. I'm sorry, she said. Not because it was the right thing to say, because she meant it entirely. He nodded. They sat in the rain. Then he put on his hat and walked to his horse and rode home. Mara went back to the window. She sat in the chair and looked at the timetable board and thought about a folded platform ticket carried in a coat pocket for 3 years, and about the particular kind of faithfulness that required. The following Friday, she left a cup of coffee on the bench before he arrived. She had made it on the small stove in the back room and thought about whether to do it for 4 days, and concluded that it was a small thing, and that small things either mattered or they didn't. Wilson arrived at 3:52. Saw the coffee, looked at the ticket window. She was attending to a passenger and did not look at him directly. He sat. He drank it. When the train had come and gone and he had sat his few minutes, he brought the cup back to the window. Thank you. It gets cold waiting, she said, eyes on the schedule board. He held the cup a moment. How did you know how I take it? I guessed. You guessed right. He left. She took the cup back to the stove and thought, he takes it with no sugar. And she had guessed that correctly on the first try because she had been paying enough attention to understand that he was not a man who added sweetness to things that didn't need it. The coffee appeared every Friday after that. She did not sit beside him again immediately. She gave him the bench and the coffee and the platform. But she noticed on the third Friday with the coffee that he stayed a few minutes longer after the train left, still looking at the tracks, but differently, less like waiting, more like remembering, which was not the same thing. What she did not know was that something had shifted in the weeks before Wilson arrived. 3 days earlier, his foreman had told him 40 head had shown signs of the lung sickness that had been moving through the county herds, a consequence of the brutal winter building to the north. The same killing cold that would devastate the cattle ranges from Kansas to Montana before it was done. Wilson had ridden the south pasture at dawn, counted what he could lose, and done the arithmetic of a man who has carried a ranch alone for 3 years and understands exactly what the margins are. He had come to the station on Friday carrying that arithmetic. He had been there, and the coffee was hot, and someone had made it for him without being asked. He drank it. He sat. He looked at the tracks, and for the first time in 3 years the tracks did not feel like only an absence. They felt like a place where he was known. She had not told him about her own Fridays, not because she was hiding it, because her version of the same loneliness felt smaller next to his, and therefore not worth equal attention. She had spent most of her adult life in her parents' house in Wichita. Her father's health had declined when she was 24. By the time she was 33, both of them were gone, and she was standing in the house they had left her with the realization that she had organized every year of her adult life around the needs of people who were no longer there to need anything. She had sold the house. She had taken the Larkspur Junction position because it was available. Every Friday she sold platform tickets to people going somewhere and watched them board trains, and went back to her room at Mrs. Patterson's and ate supper alone. She was perfectly capable of doing this indefinitely. Capability, she had learned, was not the same as sufficiency. Walking back from the station one November evening, the wind off the Kansas plain cutting through her coat, she stopped on the boardwalk and looked at the street. Larkspur Junction was a cattle town in transition. The big drives were ending. Barbed wire and wheat were changing the range faster than most ranchers wanted to admit. The feed store and the blacksmith were still busy. The hotel had new paint. Life was proceeding. She was proceeding alongside it, without being part of it. She walked to Mrs. Patterson's. She ate supper. She was 33 years old, and she had a bench and a man who came to it every Friday. And for the first time since her parents died, she had something on Friday afternoons that she looked forward to. The window she stood at all day was not just a window anymore. It was a specific vantage point from which she watched a specific person. That frightened her and mattered to her simultaneously. She went to sleep and did not resolve the contradiction. It started again in November. Not because of rain, simply because one Friday Wilson arrived and sat, and Mara, who had finished her window tasks early, carried 2 cups and sat beside him without ceremony. He did not suggest she go back inside. They watched the eastbound arrive together. 3 passengers that Friday. Wilson watched each of them with the same patient attention. Then the train left, and he looked at the tracks, and she looked at the tracks beside him. "She was 26 when I met her," he said. "Here?" "Here. She had too many bags for the platform, and I helped her, and she thanked me in the way of someone who doesn't like needing help and is trying not to show it." He looked at the tracks. "I thought about that the whole ride home." "Did you come back the next Friday?" "Before I knew if she'd be on it." Mara held her cup. The platform smelled of coal smoke from the locomotive. The Kansas afternoon was cold and very clear. "Did she know," she said, "that you kept coming before she did?" He almost smiled, slowly, the way his smiles came. "Eventually. She said the most frightening thing about me was that I was the kind of man who showed up even without guarantee." He was quiet. "She said she had never had anyone show up for her like that before." Mara looked at the tracks. She thought about what it meant to have someone arrive on consecutive Fridays before there was any reason to expect a particular outcome. She thought about her own life, which had been organized around other people's needs and had not included much showing up for possibilities because the probability always seemed low. Then she looked at Wilson, and she saw something she had not let herself see before. A man sitting on a bench in the cold because a woman had once run toward him across a platform, and because showing up in the place where that had happened was the most honest thing he knew how to do. The November platform was cold. The light was going. They sat and were quiet in the way of 2 people thinking about the same thing without having agreed to.
Most of you listening right now are in the middle of something, driving maybe, or folding laundry, or sitting somewhere quiet, letting this story keep you company. That is exactly what Forever on the Frontier is for. If Wilson and Mara are worth your Friday, leave a like. It means more than you know. Tell me in the comments where you are right now. I read everyone. Now December is coming to Larkspur Junction and something is about to change.
The cattle sickness took 11 head from Wilson's south pasture before the cold killed it. He came to the station the first Friday of December with the specific look of a man who has absorbed a loss and is not discussing it. He bought his platform ticket. He sat on the bench. He drank the coffee Mara had left. When she came out after the train, she sat beside him. "Bad week," she said. "Lost 11 to the lung sickness," he said. She had been at the ticket window long enough to know what that cost a 300-head operation. She did not minimize it. "Will you make it through winter?" "Yes," he said. "It will cost, but yes." They sat in the December cold. Down the platform, the station master was arguing with a freight handler about a misrouted crate. The locomotive idled, venting steam before pulling out of the yard. "Wilson," Mara said. "Yes." "What do you do the rest of the week? Not the ranch, the evenings." He looked at the tracks. "I eat supper. I read what I can. I sleep." He paused. "I used to talk through the accounts with Evelyn after supper. She had a better head for numbers than I did." He looked at his hands. "Now I just do them." Mara looked at the hands of a man who had been doing the accounts alone for 3 years, and eating supper alone, and sleeping in a house built for more than one. She looked at her own hands, calloused from dry ink and paper tickets. She had spent her adult life at windows, her parents' sick-room window, the boarding house window, the ticket window, watching life happen to other people. Here was a man doing the same thing from the other direction, showing up at a platform every week in the hope that the shape of something he had lost would still be visible. She understood that completely. The understanding landed in her chest and stayed there. She did not say any of this. She finished her coffee. She went back inside. He rode home. But that night, for the first time in 8 months, she sat at the small desk in her room and wrote nothing, and decided nothing, and felt, without permission, something that was not loneliness. The letter from Selina arrived in February. The Salina Junction station, larger operation, full staff, permanent position, salary 30% better than Larkspur Junction. Someone she had known in Wichita had recommended her. 3 weeks to respond. Mara read it twice. She thought about December and the accounts Wilson did alone. She thought about a man who had shown up on consecutive Fridays before there was any guarantee. She thought about herself, who had decided not to hope because the probability seemed low, and who had been in the place where the opportunity was for 8 months. She wrote back to Salina Junction. She accepted. She told no one. She worked her last 3 Fridays without saying anything. She made the coffee. She sat on the bench. She listened to Wilson talk about the cattle and the spring calving and the accounts and the laugh that had started appearing more often since November. She decided the laugh was not about her. On the last Thursday, she packed her bag. On the last Friday, she carried it to the station. Her plan was to close out her shift, buy her ticket on the eastbound for Topeka, and from there connect west to Salina and be gone before he came. Practical. The sensible thing. She was standing at the platform with her bag when she heard his horse come through the station entrance. He was late. 3:58, not 3:52. 6 minutes that should not have mattered. He came through the door and stopped. He looked at the bag. He looked at her. He looked at the eastbound pulling in behind her, the Baldwin engine breathing out its column of black smoke, the coal smell reaching them both. She had not planned for this. She had planned for an empty platform and a clean exit, and a train that took her somewhere before anyone could say anything that would make the sensible decision harder. Wilson Kincaid was standing 10 feet away, and the train was at the platform, and this was the part she had not planned for. He crossed to her. He did not say her name. He did not ask about the bag. He looked at her with the green eyes that had been looking at the tracks for 3 years, and she saw in them something she had been choosing not to see for months. He was late because a fence had needed attention on the south pasture. He had almost not come at all. He had come because it was Friday, and because Friday was what it was, and because somewhere in the last several months, Friday had stopped being only about Evelyn. The eastbound's conductor called last boarding. "Wilson," she said, "I took a position in Salina. I should have told you." He looked at the train. He looked at her bag. He looked at her. "I spent 3 years waiting for a woman who couldn't come back," he said. She was very still. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life missing one who could have stayed." The locomotive held steam at the platform. The conductor looked at his watch. Mara stood with her bag in both hands and looked at this man who had left flowers on a bench and bought a platform ticket every week for 3 years and had shown up on consecutive Fridays before there was any guarantee, and who had never once, in 8 months, asked her for something she wasn't ready to give. She thought about the Salina letter and the clean exit and the sensible decision. She thought about her mother's window and her father's window and every window she had stood at while life happened to other people. She thought about a woman running the last 20 yards of a platform because walking was too slow. She put down the bag. The conductor looked at the bag on the platform boards. He looked at Wilson. He looked at Mara. He shrugged and called final boarding. The eastbound left without her. Spring came to the Kansas plain in the way it always came, bluntly, after a winter that had meant it. Mara had stayed. The Salina position was filled by someone else. The Larkspur Junction window remained hers. Mrs. Patterson gave her no comment on the unpacked bag, which was Mrs. Patterson's form of approval. Wilson came in April to ask if she would like to see the ranch. She said yes before he finished the sentence. The ranch was what she had imagined from 8 months of Friday conversations, and more than she had imagined, too. Solid and well kept, a house built for more people than currently occupied it. She walked through it with him. He showed her the kitchen last. Evelyn had organized it, had a specific logic to where things went, what was near what, which shelf held which necessity. Wilson had not changed any of it. Not from inability to change it, from the understanding that the logic was sound and that some things you keep because they work. Mara stood in the kitchen doorway. Then he took her out to the garden. Evelyn had planted it their first spring, kitchen herbs along the south edge, something that flowered along the north wall, and in the center, coming up now in the April light, the things that came back on their own every year, because she had planted things that came back. Wilson stood beside Mara at the garden's edge and did not say anything for a moment. "She had good judgment," Mara said finally. "About the garden." "About most things," he said. Mara looked at what was growing. She thought about tending something that was started by someone else, not replacing it, not overwriting it, but understanding it well enough to continue it correctly. That was its own kind of love. A different kind than beginning, but not a lesser one. "I'd need to learn what she planted," Mara said, "before I could help with it." Wilson looked at her. "I can tell you what I know," he said, "which is not all of it." "That's all right," she said. "We'll figure out the rest." They stood in the April garden, and the Kansas light was on everything, and that was enough for that day. He went back to the bench on a Friday in May. Alone this time. Mara knew he was going. He had told her the night before, simply, and she had said she would see him after. He walked to the station. He bought a platform ticket with exact change. He sat on the second bench from the east end. He had brought wildflowers. The eastbound arrived at 4:12. The passengers stepped down. A man with a case, 2 women, a family with a child who ran ahead on the platform the way children run when they have been sitting for too long. Wilson watched each of them. The train left. He looked at the tracks going east until they bent around the hill and disappeared. He took the folded platform ticket from his pocket. 3 years of carrying. The paper was soft at the creases. He held it for a while. He thought about Evelyn. Not the absence of her, which was what he had been looking at for 3 years, but the presence of her, which was different and had been there the whole time. She was in the kitchen she had organized, and the garden she had planted, and the way he showed up without guarantee because she had loved him for it, and the loving had shaped him. She was in everything he had continued to do because of her. He placed the wildflowers on the bench beside him, not the way you put something down, the way you leave something in good hands. He sat a moment more. He looked at the tracks. Then he put on his hat. He stood up. He walked to the ticket window where Mara was finishing her shift, and he waited for her to come out, the way he had always waited, at a specific place, at a specific time, without reservation. She came out. She looked at the bench. She looked at him. She did not say anything about the flowers. He did not say anything about the flowers. They walked together through the Larkspur Junction evening, toward the life they were building, which had room in it for everything that had come before, because that was the only honest way to build something. They married in September, on a Saturday, because Friday belonged to the station, and they did not want to change what Friday was. The ceremony was simple. The Reverend, the town, Mrs. Patterson in the third row, with the expression of a woman who has been watching something develop for 9 months and is gratified. Mara wore a dress the color of the Kansas sky in September. Wilson wore his best shirt. He had worn it every Friday for 4 years. He wore it on the Saturday he married. Mara noticed and said nothing, because some things are simply what they are. After the ceremony, they walked to the station. No particular reason, no train to meet, no passenger expected. They walked there because it was where everything had started. The platform was empty in the September afternoon. The timetable board said the next eastbound was at 6:14. The second bench from the east end held nothing now. No flowers, no folded ticket, just the gray cedar boards worn smooth by years of use. Mara sat down on it. Wilson sat beside her. They looked at the tracks going east until they bent around the hill and disappeared. The coal smell from the afternoon train was still in the air. The iron rails caught the late light. "Wilson," Mara said. "Yes?" "She knew," Mara said, "about you. That you would show up even without guarantee. She knew it from the beginning." He looked at the tracks. "Yes," he said. "She did." Mara put her hand over his on the bench. He held it. The September afternoon was around them, the light going gold, the tracks going east, the town of Larkspur Junction going about its business around the small station where a man had sat on the same bench for 3 years, and a woman had asked the right question at the right time. The bench was